People. So what I'm going to be doing today is I'm going to be talking to Luke Ketelle about his boxing book. So I'll be checking that out. Luke, how you doing,
Hey, I'm
man?
good. Thank you for having me on.
All right. So yeah, it's great to have you. Now for people that might be watching this and may not be familiar with you, maybe if you could kind of introduce yourself a little bit.
Ah, shoot. Let me just turn on this light because I'm completely unprofessional. I'm just a boxing guy. I'm a lifelong boxing guy. I've been in most big professional training camps over the past 10 years, and I think I'm just an ordinary fight fan. Appreciate the fight game. Worked with fighters all the way from kickboxers like Matt Baker, all the way to being involved with as a filmer for Mikey Garcia for the Errol Spence fight, and watching Nate Diaz spar Andy Vences prior to the Conor McGregor 2 fight. So I think I have a wide assortment of things.
Now, is this your first book, or have you done some others?
I wrote a book a long time ago about a girl, but it was terrible. So like we can just throw that one out. This is the first one that actually matters. And I just want, like, obviously you're an MMA show, and you guys have you're very good at MMA. And the problem is a lot of times when people are older and they don't have the wisdom, or they have the wisdom but their bodies can't keep up with what they're capable of doing. So the point of this book is to give a young person or someone jumping into the game knowledge, so then they can use that knowledge to utilize and maximize their career.
So is it just related to like as a boxing career, or maybe?
I think it's focused on boxing, but I think it relates to MMA and kickboxing because I think the same issues carry over to all the sports. Like when you pick a gym, I personally think you either need to have a teacher or a boxing leader, someone that's leading. I don't think that the art form of fighting that you choose changes that. You know what I mean? I think that that's a universal truth. I think a lot of the underlying issues are the same. I just focused in boxing because that's where I have my most experience.
Now, maybe talk about the first experience you have with boxing.
It's uh here's a good one. So like my grandfather was a boxer, and he used to box when I was going to the table. So I was going to a dinner table. He would pump a jab on me. So like to get to the dinner, I had to get around a jab. So I'm talking about like 6, 7, 8 years old. Like the first couple of times, it's like he's not throwing it hard, but it's like my shoulders getting. So like my first experience with boxing was like someone basically teaching me how to box just for me to eat dinner. That was like my first experience, and watching a lot of fights. Like I watched my progression in boxing was watching boxing, pro wrestling, UFC fights back in the day, which I absolutely loved, which is how I got into your show. Like I'm talking about the UFC that I loved was if you wear shoes, you can't kick. Like that's the UFC that I was all in on. They're like, okay, man, you can, if you're a kick, take the shoes off, but you got to give us a gentleman's agreement. And then there was the guy in the UFC videos. What was his name? His move was just to punch people in the nuts. So he took them down, Keith
Oh,
something or another,
yeah, Keith
and it was
Hackney. Yeah.
Keith Hackney. And
Yeah.
it was like there were all these characters, and then UFC started to get a little too structured for me. So I'm like, okay. And then boxing had the Roy Joneses. It had Prince Nazim. And
Mm-hmm.
that's when I kind of think I shifted more. But I was in on the UFC really early because it was like, this is the adult version of King of the Ring. You know, it just perfectly transitioned me over. So I hope I'm answering your question. I hope I'm also just not talking a ton, and you don't get to speak or whatever. So interrupt me too.
No, I mean you're right. That's kind of I got into UFC and UFC two, but I was also a big fan of HBO boxing era, which is what you're talking about. So I watched all those fighters: Roy Jones, Nazim, Julio Cesar Chavez, De La Hoya,
Eric
Fernando
Morales
Valdez,
Pereira. Like I think that's why I love that
Morales.
fight.
Yeah, absolutely. There were
But
so
it's
many
a
good ones.
But a fight fan, right? Like if I turn on a UFC card or if I turn on a boxing card, if I don't know the fighters, I'm hoping it's like Morales Berea, where you don't
Hmm.
really know who the guys are, but you know the feeling of an awesome fight. And I feel like when we get those as a fight fan, it's like Ruslav Provodnikov, Tim Bradley. Boxing or a UFC equivalent might be like Rory McDonald versus Robbie Lawler. You know, you get these fights where it's like you think it might be good, but then when you get a good one, it's like this is what keeps me coming back is this kind of fight. And I think that's the beauty of being a fight fan.
Yeah, and I always try to every now and then try to find some of these HBO guys that were around at that time, like Angel Man Freddy. I've had on my show Ivan Robinson, some of those guys. So I was like you said, I used to watch those all the time, like every Saturday or whenever boxing after dark. I think that's
Yep.
missing in boxing today because back then they were going to give you a pretty good talent, almost every weekend or every other weekend, you
Well,
know.
people don't in boxing. I think the issue, and my book's not even really like about this per se, but let's just talk. And if people like me, then buy the book. But um, the issue with boxing is HBO used to be our gold standard. So if someone was on HBO, you're like, oh shoot, he got to H. Like I remember guys being in the gym, and it's
Hmm.
like, oh, he's fighting on HBO. They're like, Kareem Mayfield's fighting on HBO. I'm like, what? Kareem made it to like it was a big deal. It's like I
Hmm.
didn't have HBO, but you got to find the guy that has HBO. Hey man, can I come over? This guy I know. Like it was a big deal. I think for like for me, it's like I don't watch as much UFC as I used to, but I know when a big fight's coming because I can kind of sense the tropes. Like okay, they're bringing a little bit more production. These guys are talking more. With boxing, it's like you have to kind of believe the pay-per-views are good, but that boxing is basically giving you a pay-per-view a month, and a lot of the fights aren't pay-per-view worthy. So I think the
Hmm.
problem is, let's say you like MMA, college football, football, golf, basketball. How do you keep trying boxing if all these other sports give you a high-level product? Like eventually you're going to be like, oh man, I forgot to look because it's normally terrible. And that's the problem boxing has is we don't have a brand that I think the viewer thinks that's a really great product.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point that you bring up. I mean, it's something that I've talked about a little bit on my show, but I think the way you described it as HBO being the gold standard, I think the UFC is like that. People say, well, this guy got a UFC contract, that guy got a UFC contract. So I think it's a good correlation to what you described.
Well, it's like I try to watch these other leagues, right? So I'll try to watch like a 1FC, and it's like a lot of what makes a good organization isn't just the talent, it's the production value. So it's like if the production value looks a little funky to me, it can hurt me as a non-hardcore fight fan. And it's like I'm sure boxing has a bunch of these where it's like, okay, let's go to the tail tape from Manscaped, and and now we're just gonna cut to a random commercial, and here it is, and it's like boxing, HBO on top of the good fights. You got the Lampley introduction, you got the ring walk. There was a certain level of production, and I think that's what I respect most about the UFC is. I don't necessarily respect their pay structure and maybe how that works, but I do appreciate how they don't cut corners when it comes to production.
Yeah, I mean, now as a person who, like you said, you're big into boxing and UFC, maybe talk about after your exposure with your dad. When did you really start to get deep into the sport where you're an active participant?
I it's probably like 2008, right? Because like I went off to college and all types of stuff, and then you go to college and you kind of like I think most people like they feel like they're living on borrowed time. So it's like, I'm gonna make a couple mistakes here and there, and you figure it out. And it's like I didn't like when I got out of college, the recession hit. So like I'm literally looking for jobs, and it's like everyone's like, yeah, we literally don't have money. We're downsizing companies. I'm like, I don't know what downsizing a company means, but it just basically means I don't get to work here. So it was
Yeah.
like I was trying to go to internships to not even get paid just to have something to do, and I couldn't do that. So after like a really depressing kind of like I went to school and there's nothing out there for me, I basically found myself in boxing gyms and took a little while, but then me and my good friend Bilal Mahassan, who had an unfortunate circumstance at the time, me and him worked out a lot. And then the guy who's in the chat, Eddie Croft. I got to befriend a lot of people on these regional shows by Don Chargent and Paco Damian. And I think that what makes my book interesting and what makes me interesting is most people who come up in boxing from a journalistic standpoint come up with the big promoters, and they come up with the promoters kind of telling them. I came up with the regional fighters and in the gyms. So I kind of came up the way a pro fighter comes up. I came up organically in a community. So I feel like my perspective on the system of boxing or the system of fighting is more that of a fighter, or it's more fighter friendly, because my journey was more of that of a fighter than it was of someone just kind of showing up and watching people fight.
Now, as you're doing that, do you remember, like, were you brought in for certain events or anything like that that you recall?
Well, I mean, when you go to boxing gyms, right? So it's like the minute you have a camera, like I didn't know how to really use a camera, but I just bought a camera. I went to Best Buy, bought a camera that I gave away to someone now, a Canon T3i. So I don't even know what the camera does. I just said, I need a video camera and I need it to be somewhat decent looking, right? I literally go on an airplane to Philadelphia. I was taking a work trip, go to Philadelphia, and I go to a Steve Cunningham Amir Mansour fight. I don't know how to work it. The first guy I interviewed was Larry Pryor. Larry Pryor lost to Sullivan Barea, and I thought he was Sullivan Barea. It couldn't have started any worse, right? So like he's like, I'm like, how's it being a Cuban boxer? And the guy's like, well, it's great, you know, fighting Cuban boxer. I'm like, what the? And then Mike Lee's there, and like I don't know any questions. I'm not knowledgeable. I just got a pass, but I just have a camera. I'm like, if I film stuff, I guess I can stay around. So then I'd start going to the gyms in Oakland, and you know, there's a lot of talented people, and I think beyond that is you learn, going full circle about my book, you learn that there's a lot of interesting stories, and you start to see things. And my calling, I'd like to believe in boxing, is I'm a guy who really, I'm a fan of the underdog. So I try to tell stories that the big outlets wouldn't tell, but try to make a moment that they can forever have their career remembered. And that's like a big thing. So that's what I kind of evolved into, but it was like a lot of like really bad trial and error. Like if you go to my YouTube channel, go back like 6 years ago, there's some like really bad videos. And it was just like a lot of like me not knowing what I'm doing, but like basically nobody in the gym's willing to do what I was doing. So I had like unlimited freedom. So it was like I just treated it like boxing. I just kept showing up, and eventually like I feel like I got good at something.
And as you were doing it, what do you think, like when did you notice that it was maybe growing, so to speak?
When people like Eddie Croft and Greg Hackett, who I have deep respect for, jump on an Instagram live, like when you start getting respect from people that I always looked up to Eddie Croft. I always looked up to Mike Basil. I always looked up to Bruno Escalante. When these type of people would call me up and we have conversations and they didn't look at me as a stranger, that's when I knew I was on some realm of doing something right, because I got the respect of the people that I always wanted the respect from. So that's when I knew it was right. I didn't know if I was good or not. My big thing was I wanted to be a person that conveyed that I wanted to conduct myself as someone that asked for respect but also gave respect. And when I felt like others felt like I fit in, or I was a personality that was worth having, at that time there weren't like a lot of positives in my life per se. Like a lot of people were negative voices. I was like, maybe this is that one thing that I've always been looking for that could really work for me. So I just put like, even when people doubted it, I was like, I really need to put everything into this, because like all these other things people have said would be more successful, it's really led to a lot of self-destructive habits. So that's when I just kind of went and said, like, I just know if God created me for a reason, and maybe this is that reason, and let's just kind of go all in, because I don't see anyone doing what I'm doing, and I feel like people should do that.
Now, I think you're similar to some of us. Like, I was around, there was one forum back in the 90s. It was called mixedmartialarts.com. Well, originally it was called Submission
It's like a famous one. It's a famous one. It's like
yeah, it was originally called
an iconic forum.
submissionfighting.com. Yeah, originally. And so I think we were kind of the underground, so to speak, of guys that were interested in the sport that maybe talked about it on the internet. And
Dial up, like you're like, oh man,
right,
I
so
gotta
I
get this
think
dial up going.
you and me have some similarities in that
Yeah.
regard. But I just want you to take me through as it was growing, what you're doing, kind of how that was.
I mean, it's like it was just like I don't know. It's like asking a fighter when they think they became a good fighter. It's like it's not really like a moment where you're like, man, I'm a good fighter. It's like you remember being really bad or you remember mistakes and
Hmm.
then you remember walking into a room and knowing how to conduct yourself and you know how to make good quality stuff that everyone likes. But you don't really remember, at least for me, the process because the process is kind of painful. It's more like a grind and it's more like me having to make decisions with my own mind that like I'm going to be accountable this time. I'm going to make decisions for me that move me forward. It was more that type of stuff than it was ever like, okay. I mean, the big thing is it's like, okay, I'll work. And then if after I work, I'll swing by the gym at 4 o'clock, whatever gym, whether it's the Kennel in Hayward, if it's Belial Boxing for Health at the time, if it's the Martinez gym by Sean Sharkey. I'm just going to try to be in the gym 3 times a week. Not even to work out. I'm just going to try to be there. If I got my camera, I'll try to film. But it was just like, I just need to be comfortable in the gym. I need to understand when a guy gets a fight, the excitement of that person getting a fight. And just kind of having a pulse on what local fighters people thought were good. You know what I mean? Like, oh, this guy's coming. Like, ooh, everyone respects him. I better show up on Saturday. So it was like a journey from going to being like, I'm all the way on the outside just as a person that shows up and I'm on pins and needles to really working to going to a gym and understanding the social norms and being comfortable. And then from that, being invited to like when the big things happen. So like that was kind of the journey. And I think that like really probably the apex mountain of like my graduation was when Andy Vences fought Eric De Leon. That was like Herb Stone, who was a manager, had kind of laid a foundation and kind of helped me understand the business to a certain extent. And then that fight camp, I just remember I was around Andy so much. And that was like a moment where it felt like I was leveling up. I probably did level up, but I really didn't. So that was like probably the moment where it's like, oh man, co-main event, ESPN, 2 undefeated fighters. He's sparring Ivan Redcatch for 4 straight weeks. I've probably been at like almost every sparring session. I've been at almost every workout. Like I was there for the whole camp. I went down. I remember someone in his crew, I'd probably be mad, but I'll share this with you. Like they bought a fruit roll up, and I guess it was a weed fruit roll up, and I grabbed a big wad of it, and I was about to eat it, and they're like, "What are you doing? That's weed." And I'm like, "Oh, I don't even want that. I wanted a fruit roll up." Like I thought it was like a. I mean, that's the type of thing, you know. So, I mean, that's probably the moment. I don't know. Am I even answering your question?
Yeah, I mean, because everyone kind of finds a sport or gets into this kind of stuff. Like, there's those people who go to school for it, right? Then you have people like me, other people who maybe they just got into it because they were fans or whatever, and they started creating content that way. And me, I mean, I just do this stuff for fun because I've been around the sport forever. I have a
And that's
regular
why
job,
that's why
you
I'm glad to be on your show because it's like I see the passion that you have for the
know.
sport. Like you're preserving the sport. Like you're not
Right?
doing this on some like, man, I can't wait to make a ton of money. Like
No.
this is like you're doing this because like I'd like to believe and I believe this is true. You want to preserve the legends of this game and you also want to celebrate the young faces that might get
Right.
ignored. And I think that's the issue with the fight game. I see Coach Lugo jumping in the chat. Thank you, Coach Lugo, for coming on. He has two great sons, Nathan and Elijah. None of these, I shouldn't say none. Sports Illustrated did an article on them. But do you know how many of these big media outlets won't write a story on a decorated amateur boxer? But the
Right.
minute they turn pro, they all want to do a story. And I'm a proud American. I was born in Norway. I'm proud American, and I'm proud of my American fighters. And I'm proud when they go to the Olympics or when they fight. And that almost feels like that's a cuss word nowadays to say that I'm proud to see people from my community do well. And it's so strange that so few media outlets want to help build young fighters. And I guess that, to circle back to the book, this book is about kind of a guidebook of just check marks and things I hold to be true in the boxing industry, not negative, because you don't want to be negative in boxing or anything, because you go negative and everything's bad. But just these are some observations I've seen. I'm not saying they're to be true. This is what I see to be true. And I just hope they can help someone down the road so people don't have to make the same mistakes I made. And that's basically it.
Now, does it cover the gamut from like managers, boxers, people that are covering the sport? Does it cover all those things or one thing in particular?
So the way we start is basically like if you're choosing a gym, a boxing gym or an MMA gym. So you start the gym, and it's like, what are you looking for? What do you look for when you go to choose a gym? And that's a question I think a lot of people don't ever think, because when they go to pick a football coach, they go, oh, I mean, can he take my kid from 4 to 6? They don't go, well, who's the best fit for my kid? But in boxing or MMA, you need to find someone that can relatively either protect or connect your kid. Like, that's the truth of the matter. Someone can get really hurt in this game, and you need to find a personality that fits. And if you really want to do this, you need to find the right people to work with you. So we start there. Then if you have any ambitions of wanting to be a pro fighter, you got to fight in the amateurs. And you got to have some level of success, because those people that you're going to fight in the amateurs, guess what? You're going to fight them in the pros again. And if you're not doing good in the amateurs, it's probably not going to be good in the pros. So we go from there. Then we start to talk about emotion and how emotion is kind of like the alcohol of fighting. So in like life, you know, alcohol can make us make bad decisions. Whenever I see an attractive woman, it's like I drink too much. Oh God, Uncle Lukey might say something crazy. Emotion is like the alcohol in the ring. You can make so many bad decisions if you use anger or any form of emotion to be your sustained source. I feel like is one of the biggest life lessons any fighter has to have, is to be able to fight without emotion, and it's inhuman. So that's kind of like the beginning basis of how this book is structured.
Now, a lot of people follow my show, obviously, are MMA fans. Let's talk about how you got into Diaz's camp for that. It was the first McGregor fight?
That was the second. So let's
Second.
give story time. Hopefully this can go viral for you. That would be great. Shout out to the fire emojis. Love seeing some fire emojis. Hit that like heart button too if you can. So it was the second fight. Diaz had just beaten Conor McGregor. There's a rematch. Don't quote me on this, but people, I believe, were saying it was like $1 million camp. So like Conor McGregor spending $1 million on his camp. There was like all these rumors, right? So Gabe Flores at the time and Andy Vences trained together, and the father, Gabe Flores Sr., was there. Andy Vences is a lot smaller than Nate, and he's 130-pounder, but they needed a southpaw, and they needed an elite southpaw. So the way that came together was he needed looks at southpaw. So they came, and I mean, it was different, because it's like, it's kind of a culture, the Diaz crew. They're really, really nice guys, but I wouldn't say it's like a religion, but it's not far from a religion. So you get like 10 guys, they all look like they've been potentially smoking here and there. Maybe it's just like they kind of look like they're from Nirvana, like a little grunge look. Come in, super nice. Like every single guy has a bag. Everyone comes up. They don't even know you are. Everyone's shaking your hand. Hey, pleasure to be here, all that stuff, right? And then like you're just seeing shadow boxing. Andy and Nate spar. Whatever happened in that, we keep it in the gym. I don't need to get on here and talk about that.
Mm-hmm.
And the funniest thing to me was, so it's like I'm seeing like whatever kind of shadow boxing. Maybe a guy's hitting the bag. It's not really blowing my mind. They just go in the ring and start sparring each other. It's like, oh, they're here for the meat and potatoes. They're like, oh, that other stuff, that's not so. So, like, they were round robining in, just beating the hell out of each other. And I was like, okay, that's kind of their system. But Andy and Gabe, they trained out of Stockton at that time. And that gym, Gabe Flores Sr.'s, at the time, that was the most successful boxing gym. Richard Perez knows Gabe Flores. So the way that kind of got set up was they were looking for some elite boxers to give him that look. Obviously, Alan Sanchez, who's fighting October 29th on the Cash Creek card at Brooks, California for Paco Presents Boxing and Don Chargin Productions. He obviously gives Nate a lot of work, but that was just one of those things because Nate's a celebrity, right? And it's like seeing Jimi Hendrix, right? He's kind of like iconic, and when he comes in, it's like it's very obvious it's famous guy. It's like, whoa, famous guy is here. It's like this is different. There's an energy to it. So I don't know. Like I've seen him like a few times, but it's like after a while, I've worked on myself to not really be starstruck. You just have to be a professional, you know? Like I've never not been a professional, but it's to a point where I can't count how many times I've been around him because I've just tried to be like, you know what, I'm going to respect what he's doing. And it's like, I'm also like, if I'm not getting paid to film someone, it's kind of like, he's probably got other people to do that anyway. It's not like, does anyone want to go to my boxing channel and see just him hit a bag? Like, I don't think that that's like riveting entertainment. I think he has a well-qualified person to tell better stories than that. So, but yeah, there you go.
Now, he just had his last fight in the UFC.
Yeah.
What do you think he's going to do next? I mean,
I
have you
mean, it's
been
pretty
paying attention to that?
obvious. He's going to box. His buddy's fighting
So,
Dr. Mike, or what is it? What's the doctor's name? It's like Dr. Mike or Dr. something.
yeah,
He's
yeah,
Chris Avula's fighting a doctor, a YouTube doctor. And I mean, it's pretty obvious. Like if Jake Paul wins or looks interesting against Anderson Silva, Nate's gonna fight Jake Paul. Like it's not rocket science. Do you know how many people want to see that fight? Because Nate Diaz to me is the Stone Cold Steve Austin of MMA. Like it's like he comes out, he's like the super cool anti-hero. It's like the undertone is like I smoke weed, but I'm still a badass athlete and this and that and the third. Jake Paul is a very like I don't personally find him hateable, but he's like a lot of people find him hateable. He's like a white guy that looks like very entitled. He looks like he's just gone on the internet and he looks like a creative player that you give a 14-year-old for a video game, like create what you want to look like, and it's Jake Paul. And
Mhm.
I think that would create like an interesting conflict amongst the fans because I think that would be one of the bigger events next year because people would just like to see those two in the same place.
Yeah, I think it's a big deal for the UFC though because this is the first time in quite a while where a very high-profile guy who, sells a lot of pay-per-views was on the free agent market. I mean, this used to happen back when Pride was really big in Japan, but the sport wasn't as big in the U.S. I think this is the first time where someone is a free agent that could really command an offer from every organization,
I
including.
think the rumor I'm hearing, and don't quote me on this, is he's starting a company called Real Fight, and
Yeah, I've
he's
already.
trying to start like his own promotion where it's going to be like jujitsu that he can do on a streaming platform, then boxing matches. But I think the main thing too is if you start your own promoter show, then you can co-promote. If he fights a Jake Paul, he's not just a fighter, now he's a co-promoter, so he gets a revenue share of the
Right.
money from the event as opposed to just being a fighter who's paid a salary. So when I saw that to me kind of told me I think he's going towards the Jake Paul fight because not just can he put on shows for his friends, he can also get that revenue split and create a partnership deal. Imagine if he lands a deal with Showtime. 3-fight event with jiu-jitsu events or whatever, MMA event, boxing event. He's a very interesting person. So to have him on your platform, there's going to be a lot of people that want to see what he wants to promote.
Right, and I think a lot of people are thinking is the first time where the UFC is in a position where all their fighters are going to see what the possibilities are for somebody, because now that he's going through free agency, there's probably going to come out some of what he was getting paid, what he's
Oh, I'm
being,
sure.
yeah, and I think that's the first time that this happened in recent memory where there's somebody who is free and clear, who still commands a very large audience.
Well, I think it's interesting
And
too because Francis Ngannou is kind of in the same spot. Like I
sort of.
believe
He's not out of his contract yet, but yeah,
he's
similar.
like similar spot, and it's like it's looking like the UFC has to change something because it's like this can't like they're either gonna have to make contracts you can't get out of, or they're gonna have to do something where the fighters are like, okay, I'm gonna stay here because if I want to take a boxing match, they'll let me take one fight, but not a slew. I think the thing that's killing the UFC is they've never wanted to co-promote with people. And because of that, that was really good for them for certain points. But it's really hurting them in this real, like, influencer boxing era where there's like this big, just interesting people being able to make money boxing. The UFC, it's like a well-known UFC fighter can go into boxing and they can get an interesting fight for a good paycheck. And the UFC is so hell-bent on not allowing fighters to do that. It kind of limits their negotiating power unless they offer more money.
What do you think of this influencer boxing? How big do you think it can get?
I mean, someone's gonna die, bro. Like they're literally putting in there people who don't fight, and they're just like have an 8 week training camp. I saw Adrian Peterson get knocked out by Le'Veon Bell, and it literally looked like he did an 8 week camp, but he didn't do a skills component camp. Like if you're gonna take a boxing match, at the very least you need to train boxing for 1 year. If you do an MMA match, at the very minimum, you have to do probably like 2 years to be competent in some capacity. Boxing, at least you can get away. These guys, it's scaring me. They're guys and girls. They're jumping in on like 6, 8 week notice camps, and they're kind of playing with the game. They're acting like it's a joke. They're playing boxing. Someone's going to get hit and really hurt, and it's what I'm scared about is they're going to put more sanctions on boxing, and they're going to look at us like a clown sport. And they're going to act like boxing is wrong when it's these people are like, and I don't want to say it's wrong because at the same time, there's some people doing it right. Like Mike Lenardi doing Creator Clash is awesome. He's doing it the right way. That's a boxing guy. I think Jake Paul is doing it right because he's taking on interesting opponents and he's treating the sport fair. I'm just getting scared of the knockoff Jake Paul people that want to be like him, but they're putzing around because someone's going to get hurt.
Like, what about Salt Pappy? You ever seen Salt Pappy?
Is he fighting?
He's already had a couple of fights. You haven't seen his fight?
Oh, fuck. No, I mean, I can't keep up with this.
He looks like he has legit ability, though, but the two guys he fought didn't. And like you said, the last guy he fought, Andy Worski, he just decapitated him very quickly, like you were saying.
I mean, it's getting to a point like where at a certain point, you have to wonder if these fights are fixed. Like, because it's like, do you know what I mean? It's like, oh, Salt Pappy knocked out. So, like, if he's looking too good and he's not a pro boxer, doesn't there start to be a question on what are we even watching? You know, that's the issue.
In his defense, when he was making his content, he used to show a lot of him boxing. Long time ago.
So he's a boxer. So he's a boxer.
Him and his buddies would be boxing down on the basketball court. I think he's from London somewhere. You know, they'd have like their apartment, you know, this apartment block, and they'd be down there with their headgear on boxing. And he was doing that for a long time before, you know, he ever had any boxing matches. And he looked like he had real skills.
Well, I mean, like, I'm saying there's like people who literally have never boxed and potentially have never worked out hard. Like maybe they've worked out, but they've never worked out hard. Potentially have been doing like recreational drugs. And now they're just going to jump over to boxing for 8 weeks. And it's like, we really think this is a good idea? Like, it's like, oh, here's this guy, you know, he does YouTube videos and he reviews hardcore drugs. And now he's going to box someone. We don't see how this could go wrong. Like, I guess my concern is boxing's in such a weird position. No one would watch Adrian Peterson or Le'Veon Bell play a basketball game. Like, remember COVID? It's like, oh, it's the horse game from Paul Pierce's house. And we're like, what the hell is this? We're so starved for sports. We were watching Paul Pierce and Kevin Garnett or something play horse from their mansion. And boxing's the only sport where we'll be like, it's so janky. We'll accept Adrian Peterson versus Le'Veon Bell fight each other. And I guess I get a little defensive because it's like, we got some really good fighters, and I sure hope they can get attention for just being a boxer. Because like guys like Arnold Barboza just keep winning fights, but in this day and age, that's not good enough. You can't get a title fight by just winning fights, and you can't get a title fight just by being a decent person that doesn't want to call people out by acting like a jerk. And that sucks.
Yeah, you see it in MMA too. You know, it's starting to be that way.
Yeah, it's gross because it's like I get college football has favoritism. I get that the NBA has favoritism, but it's very simple. You win the games, you see the better teams play the better teams. UFC, it's the same thing. You see a UFC fighter fight, he wins, you get to see him against a good fighter. In boxing, I hope to see one of our best fighters compete against a relevant fighter. And that's what hurts boxing, right? Is it's because it's not even a business. People love to say, "Oh, it's a business." It's a power structure. It's a gauntlet to get to the top, and once you get to the top, it's like neener neener neener. I'm at the top. What are you gonna do? You have to
Yeah.
go fight other people, and it's not a fun product for the fans to see because it hurts the legacy of the fighters. I want to see how good David Benavidez is. I don't want to have to
Hmm.
talk to people about who did he have to beat. He's a number one contender. Shouldn't
Hmm.
that be good enough to qualify you? And like what my problem too with world champions, now I'm going on a Lukey rant, is why are world champions designating who is ready to fight them or not? Like, isn't the point of being a world champion that they say this is who you fight and you go, okay, cool, I'm a world champion. Now we live in a world where they're like, I don't want to fight him. He's not ready for me. What kind of world is this?
Yeah. Yeah, I saw that with Canelo, and I'm like, the fans are why you're able to do this ultimately. Why worry about wins and loss? Just fight who they want you to see fight, who they want to see you fight.
But it's like,
It's
it's also like Canelo probably beats most fighters in the world. And it's like, you get paid so much money to do what you love. And it's like, there's only like two or three fighters we really want to see you fight because you're that good. And then when we bring up one of them, you go, I'm going to cancel a press conference and I'm in a bad mood. What the hell, Canelo? Your job is to put on great, entertaining shows for fight fans across the world who work 5 days a week and work really hard. And then we spend a lot of money to see you fight. And when we bring up a fight from our consumer dollars we're interested in, nah, that pisses me off. I mean, we live in a bizarro world. Boxing is the only sport where the customer's wrong. We're the customer, but we're wrong.
You're seeing it in MMA too now. I think you're seeing it more in the UFC. You're seeing a lot of that attitude. Oh, I don't want to fight this guy from the champions. There's certain guys they're avoiding, and it is
But I
pretty
don't even
irritating.
think it's avoiding. That's the issue. Is like I don't know what happens if Canelo fights David Benavidez. I don't know what happens with some of these things. It just feels like they don't want to give him the opportunity. I don't know that they don't like they're ducking the fight. It's just like this thing of I don't have to give you the fight, so fuck you. And that's the annoying part. Is it's like it's not even like it's set in stone that Benavidez would win. It's a 50-50 fight. The problem is these stars are like, I want to fight the easy fight. It's like, what the hell? How does our sport grow?
Right. Yeah, I mean that's what I loved about the HBO era. You knew you were going to get the fights you wanted. It was only a matter of time. They had a
Well,
huge stable, and those guys were going to fight each other. It was just, I think that's the other problem. If you have a big collection in their stable, that's the problem. There's too many stables now.
I think that
HBO has a very big stable, and they could make A fights B, B fights C, so on, so on, so on, so on. Now you really can't do that. So I think there's too many stables.
another issue too is exclusive contracts. I think that the more I see it, I understand from a stability standpoint from the promoters to want an exclusive contract from a network. But I really would love to see a free market where the networks could just freely bid on each fight, because then that would force the promoters to have to give the fans the best fights possible.
Hmm.
When X promoter is locked into a network, it helps the promoter, but now the promoter has a buffer of a budget that they're going to get no matter what, and then that gives the fans like a uh-oh, are we going to get the backup fight? I wish that there were more bidding wars over what is it that the fans want, and that's what we're going to give you the more money for that budget.
Yeah. Yeah, it's frustrating. I mean, like you said, when I was watching Canelo, I was like, He gives the reasons that he gave didn't seem to make sense. I mean, he fought Chavez Jr., who's Mexican. you know, it's just that he didn't want to fight Benavidez for
Well,
whatever
and
reason.
then there's Gilberto Zordo Ramirez at 175, who might beat Bivol. And it's like two of the most interesting fights are Zordo and David Benavidez. And David Benavidez is Mexican, but he's Mexican American, and I believe he's half Nicaraguan. So, like, what is your designation of a Mexican, sir? Because it's like it's not like he's like a. I don't believe he was born in Mexico, and he's not like a full blood Mexican. He represents Mexico. He is a Mexican, but it's like, are we really playing like this linguistics game of what is and what isn't? Some of the best fights we talked about in the beginning of this chat, Marco Antonio Barrea versus Eric Morales, they're both Mexicans. This is
Mm-hmm.
not an uncommon thing that fighters from the same country can fight to see who's the best fighter in that era. I think the problem is Canelo doesn't want to give up being the best fighter in Mexico or risk that or divide fans. And I think it's a political leverage for him because he knows the only two things Mexico unites over is Mexican soccer and Canelo Alvarez fights. And he doesn't want any of those fans that love him to maybe go one way or another.
Yeah. Yeah, it's frustrating for fans though. Like we've had this conversation so many times over the years, you know what I mean? That it just doesn't ever seem to rectify itself.
I mean, it sucks, bro, because it's like the problem, and I keep saying this over and over when I've been doing these to promote the book, is boxing right now is a building that's being looted during a national disaster. So it's like a burning building that's being looted. That's, oh, there's more money for the budget. Go in there and get the Snickers bar. Get this, get that. You come out, someone's like, oh, get a little bit more. You can still get a little bit more. I don't hear enough in boxing of what is it the fans want to see and how do we make this fight. I hear a lot of, well, we got to make the fights that are most makeable or accessible. Well, to me, from a business standpoint, that's not good business. That basically sounds like the executives are going to make as much money as possible and not have to compromise their salaries to get more intriguing fights because the money now will be distributed more widely amongst more people if they get a more compelling fight. And I think that's another issue is you keep it in-house, the money stays in-house. And I think the problem is boxing, probably not unlike the UFC, it's hard to make a living off of it, right? It's hard to make enough to have a sustainable career from it. And because of that, people are pretty protective of incomes, and they don't want to compromise their standard of living.
Yeah, and it's not just that fight. You got all kinds. I mean, Tank, there's all kind of guys I'd like to see him fight.
Oh
And
yeah.
he can't fight any of them. It's
When
it's
I was at a show this weekend, and it's like someone asked me about Tank, and I go, "Well, look, he might be the best guy in the whole world, but I have no clue. Like, I have no clue, right?" And they go, "Well, you're not high on Tank?" I said, "No, sir. I never said I'm not high on Tank. I actually think Tank might be the best fighter in the world, but we can't just say that he's the best fighter when we got fighters like Shakur Stevenson who have 2 world titles in 2 different divisions. There has to be a level in boxing, like Usyk. He's undisputed at cruiserweight, becomes a unified at heavyweight. We have to have a level of achievement to be a great. We have to have a level of achievement in UFC, right? George St. Pierre earned being a great fighter through achievement. Obviously, like, we could just watch with the eye test and you're like, man, this guy's good. But part of the greatness component is the longevity, right? And part of what's annoying me is Tank is 27. Where is his legacy run? Where is his, this is how great I am? I see the money aspect of it. I understand he can make a ton of money. But where is the, I'm going for the Hall of Fame moment?
Now, as we're kind of winding down the interview, I want to give you a chance to promote the book a little bit more. Where can people buy it? Where can they follow you? Some of the things you're doing with it.
I want to show you this frog that's in my room. It's crazy. Let's see what
It's
it is.
distracting.
Well, no, it's got like this crazy, like, I don't know what it is. There's like these legs to it. It's like, I can't see it. Do you see that? It's like
Yeah.
protruding. It's crazy. So, yeah, that was a little update. Hopefully, book is out. Amazon. Lucas Ketelle, Inside the Ropes of Boxing. If you like, power went. If you like how I sound as a human being, and I wouldn't even say it's a boxing book. This is if you're a fighter or if you want to understand boxing. I wouldn't say understand it. And look, Marvin Samudio jumped on the chat. What's up, Marvin? That's one of the best boxing coaches in the world. We're just about to end this. I appreciate you jumping on. It's a book for those that I think are hardcore fight fan enthusiasts that want to understand what a fighter might have to go through, or someone that's going through the journey to kind of just look at some of the things that might be ahead of them, or to even just reflect on it and see if it sounds like a familiar voice or if it just sounds crazy. But I think it's more so designed to either help a fighter or give someone more empathy to understand what fighters have to go through, because a fighter's job is very hard.
And how much is the book?
So you can get it for free on Amazon Unlimited if you have that platform. $8.99 on the ebook, $9.99. I did have a book in here, but I didn't bring it over. It's a really nice book. I'm actually losing money a little bit because I got the nicest form of the cover and the print. So if you buy it, my big thing is I don't want you to feel ripped off. 117 pages. It was originally 200. I worked with an editor. We chopped it down to 117 pages. So it's not a lot of rambling. Hopefully it's good. So if anyone comes on here and wants to get it, let me know. And I don't know. I wrote a book. I'm trying to give my all to promoting it.
Now, are you going to be able to get it in stores and things like that too, eventually?
We're working on that. Right now it's just Amazon because, I mean, honestly, I feel like everything I buy in my life is on Amazon. So Amazon was my priority because, I mean, I agree brick and mortar stores are important, but I feel like if it's available on Amazon, pretty much everyone in the world has bought something on Amazon. So my number one priority was Amazon because they're just a very powerful company.
Now, what are some other projects you might be working on?
I've got a film series coming up in the fall, and it's going to involve an MMA fighter, Brooke Mayo. So I'm doing a feature on Brooke Mayo. She's kind of going through some stuff, and we're going to try to tell a story with Brooke Mayo and maybe 3 or 4 other fighters. But Brooke Mayo, that's the most interesting thing. I'm not sure if it's going to be released on her Instagram channel in parts or on my channel or whatever, but I'm going to be doing content with Brooke Mayo. So that's probably the most interesting.
Is she like in your area? Is that why?
Kind of. I mean, she's a little outside of my area. I've known her for a while. I've probably known her for about 8 years, probably maybe 7 or 8 years. And her story and where she's at right now is kind of interesting. And I think whenever I told people kind of the idea, everyone gravitated towards it. And I talked to Brooke and she wanted to do the project. So now it's just figuring out the days where we're in the same places and we're on the same schedule. So, but I hope it's good. You know, it'd be nice if it's good. If it's bad, then, you know, it's no different than what was probably existing before. But I think Brooke's story is very interesting, and I think it's a story a lot of different fighters and a lot of different people want to hear.
Now, have you ever thought of getting more involved in MMA? Because I think MMA is kind of a thing. I don't know. I haven't been around boxing in that capacity, but it's something where someone who has some ability, you know, experience like yourself can break into.
I mean, for sure. It's like, it's all about meeting the right people. And it's like, I know the boxing world really well. I'd love to do things in the MMA world. But like, thanks to Dana White in the late 2000s, when you go to a place and you say you're the boxing guy, there's still that stigma. Like, I remember I did a video with Jake Shields, who's a really nice guy. I shot a video with Jake Shields, and it was like they were asking me about something, and James Toney comes up. And James Toney, to most MMA fighters at that time, was a laughing stock. To me, that was someone I'd grown up watching as one of the best boxers ever. So it's like there's just like weird, awkward moments that you have to kind of get through. They're like, at this point in my life, it's very easy. But like, I feel like at MMA gyms, I want to have someone kind of guiding me through it because I just don't understand like another example. I went to the scrap pack gym and it's like I'd never had people roll into my knees more in my life. It's like I'm shooting and like people consistently were banging into me and like knocking me down. And it's just like just prepping and understanding for all that stuff. It's just a different world. But I mean, I think if I do a good job with Brooke, maybe that's something that might happen. I never like plan this stuff out. It's based on relationships. So if I connect with someone and I want to make a good story, that's what it is. I connect with Brooke Mayo. I feel like her story hasn't been told the way I personally want to see it. And the way I work, like the book I wrote, this is a book I wanted to read on boxing. I'm very selfish. When I do a video, when I do an interview, this is the interview I wanted to hear on your show. When I make a video on Brooke Mayo, it's the video I wanted to see. So that's the way I approach things. So I have a very unique way I want to see this video with Brooke, and I got to see if I'm capable of doing it.
Now, are you out in California then, or are you?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's a good place to be if you're wanting to work with fighters, for sure.
Yeah, everywhere is
A lot of,
plenty. Yeah, there's a lot. I mean, it's just boxing, MMA, it's very political, right? So it's like you'll be like, oh, there's AKA, there's the Diaz brothers, and you'll go film at one place, and they'll be like, man, why'd you go to that place? That's where and all of a sudden you're in this weird gym conflict, and you don't really care. You're just trying to film people and make the most exciting content for your people. But it's like with MMA, with boxing, it's like I understand the political nature of that stuff. With MMA, it's like I don't really have the people around me to explain the political landscape and understand the power structures. So it's like I have to observe, I have to do YouTube homework, I have to like look at where the rivalries exist because that stuff can really, really just like short term derail you and not want me to make stuff because it's like, oh, you did this with so and so, I hate him. You know, it's like high school.
when were you at Scrap Pack?
Uh, Probably 5 years ago.
Hmm.
4 or 5. Like, I mean, I've been there about 10
I have him on
times.
my show from time to time, but he went to prison.
What was his name?
Derek Galanis, he wasn't there when you were there because I think he was in prison at that time. But uh,
Huh. If
I'll
I
have
saw his face, maybe,
to,
because it's like I went there about 10 times.
yeah, he's
And,
been writing a book actually. He wrote a book. His father and his brother, they were all in prison. They're all
well,
kind of
it's a
like
cycle.
all criminals,
Yeah.
and so he wrote a book about that. And so yeah, it's kind of interesting. He's been on a lot of shows. He's been on mine and a couple. He's out now, obviously, but pretty interesting guy.
I mean, like the first time I went there, it was when Nate Diaz fought someone and called out Conor McGregor. So, like the fight where he won and called out Conor McGregor on a TV show, it was that training camp. And then he had a guy that was called like Medicine Man on Instagram, was driving him around, and he had like a jacket and stuff. And then there was a guy named Cron Gracie, who I guess is really important
Hmm.
because people were like, "Oh, that's Cron Gracie," and I genuinely didn't know who he was. And I was there with Xavier Zigny, who's a good friend of mine, and then Matt Baker, who's another good friend of mine. Who, if people are fans of this, they should check out my series I've done with him. We got to do another one. It's called American Kickboxer, and Matt Baker's a really good kickboxer, and he'd go to the scrap pack and we'd go. But I mean, it's like I guess that's the other thing. I don't know who people are. Like I'll watch it, but I don't really know. Like I know who Gilbert Melendez is. I know Jake Shields is. But it's also partially because people told me, okay, that's Gilbert Melendez, and then I meet him and he's like, hi, I'm Gilbert. It's like I didn't really fully understand what they had achieved. So I'm just kind of like a space alien roaming around with a camera, trying not to get in the way and piss people off. It's not like I'm really understanding or utilizing what's around me when I'm at that place, kind of.
Well, it was great talking to you. I appreciate you taking all this time to talk to me about boxing and stuff, and I'm glad I could uh, bring you on to talk about your book. Where can people follow you?
I mean, it doesn't matter. Just follow your program. Doesn't matter about following me. Buy the book if you like me. I don't need the follows. And I appreciate. Look, as Jay Prince says, If you campaign long enough, you will get elected. I appreciate you having me on this program. It's an honor.
Yeah, and I appreciate you taking the time. I'd love to bring you back. Maybe we could talk about some fight coming up or something in the future.
Yeah, sure enough, we'll do it. Just tell me in advance, and we'll set it up. And I'd love to come on. I can talk fights all day, and I genuinely, from the bottom of my heart, I appreciate you making time and getting the word out. And I hope, I also hope people that hear me know, just because I'm a boxing guy, I'm not scared if a guy's wrestling or something. I'm not going to be like, oh, he's doing this or that. No, I'm a fighting guy. I just have to be from a boxing fighting family. But I don't disrespect any form of fighting, because getting punched in the face is getting punched in the face. So it doesn't really matter how you get to the punch. If you take them down or you kick them, it's all the same.
Maybe we can go back in the time machine and do like an HBO type discussion.
Okay, well, I'm
I'd love
working
to
on a
that.
time. I'm working on a time machine in that closet. So,
Yeah,
in a couple of weeks, maybe I can hop in that son of a gun and
because
we'll
I
do it. But
loved the era, and it sounds like you did too.
I mean,
You know,
I enjoy fighting. I enjoy quality fights. My only issue is I don't understand. Like, I partially self-published a book because I'm trying to chase greatness and do as much possible as I can do with this life I have. It annoys me when fighters who are making millions of dollars do not try to achieve as much as possible when they are absolutely badass and some of the best fighters to ever live. That honestly annoys me. And when the answer is, well, they're rich, that's not a good enough answer, because Warren Buffett still goes to work every day and he's richer than everyone. Like, the legacy in fighting, I'm getting annoyed that that's going further and further away from being part of the sport.
I think that's a great thing to end it on as well.
Okay, the frog's coming back. Let's see how this guy's. What is this about? It's like he brings his legs up. It's this weird. Let's see if you can see this. He brings his legs up, and it's. Come on, guy. Do you see that? That's crazy.
Yeah.
But I appreciate it, man. I appreciate you having me on. This was a ton of fun.
All right, man. It's great talking to you, and take care. And like I said, I'll get with you on some stuff here soon.
Okay, right on.
Take care. It's great talking to you.